Welcome everybody to tonight's Flameless Fireside podcast. We have a pretty awesome show tonight. We are going to be talking about a very sensitive subject, but a very, I would say, awesome movie. There's my short, quick review. We're going to be talking about The Sound of Freedom tonight. I know that's kind of a little bit of a breakaway from what we normally go over as far as singles matters, but I feel like this is an important matter, and we discussed it and felt like this is something that needs to be shared and discussed on our podcast. So for those of you joining us for the first time tonight, welcome. We are happy to have you. Let me introduce everybody here going round robin. First, I am your host, Everett, along with our co-host for tonight, Corey, who will have a special part in our presentation tonight, along with our lovely, wonderful dating life coach, Celeste, and soon to be joined by, hopefully, our other co-host, Joyce, who is working through a couple technical issues at the moment, but she will be joining us here shortly. So let's get into this right off the bat. First and foremost, who of everybody here has seen Sound of Freedom? I think we all have, haven't we?
Yep.
No, I have. Yes.
We absolutely had.
Yes. Awesome. So going into this movie, I sort of knew what to expect, and we're going to get into this probably a little bit more in depth, and we won't give too many spoilers here. I think we'll get to a point where we'll share some spoilers
We'll
with
warn you. How about that?
We'll warn
If it happens, yes.
Yeah,
We'll give a warning. Plug your ears.
Absolutely. So let's start with you, Corey. You went and saw this movie. What were your first impressions?
I thought it was very well done. I thought, at least for a very long time, since Maverick or since some of these other movies, like it's a very, very well done movie, and it was straight to the point. The acting was amazing. I mean, even the little kids, like, were just amazing actors. I mean, I could not believe that little kid, the way he interacted with the main character. It was really, really good movie. I mean, I think I was at the edge of my seat when I found out it was almost 2.5 hours. I'm like, what?
Oh,
I thought it was only like an hour and 40 minutes or something. It just flew by. It was amazing. Very, very good movie.
Well, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss it here on the podcast is many of us are parents, and this can hit home in a very personal way. For those of us who have little ones still, this is something that can be of great concern. And to be honest with you, a few years ago, I really knew nothing about this. This was not on my radar. I had no idea this was really going on. And when I saw the movie, and, I've read some things since then. I've seen some things before watching the movie. I've watched a few of the documentaries by Tim Ballard and OUR organization. And I got to say, like, when I'm sitting there in the theater watching this, there is a component of me that just wants to say, this is what I want to do my whole life. Like, I would love to dedicate myself to this. I want to make sure that this is like eradicated. I know it won't be, but we'll talk a little bit about, as we get going into the podcast some more, why this is becoming such a prevalent issue in our society. And just to preface it, to go back a little bit, we had an opportunity to interview one of the longtime, he was a volunteer with Operation Underground Railroad. And Celeste, what was his official capacity? Do you remember? It was...
I don't remember. He had a title. I sent it over to you, so I don't remember.
Okay.
But he was right up there working with, like, the CEO or whatever the top person would be.
We'll get that for you.
Working with them, yeah.
Right. Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Caught me off guard.
So we had a special interview with Brett Bunker, and he was able to give us his insights, having worked with Operation Underground Railroad for many years. We'll also hear tonight from Corey, who has also had some personal experience in this line of work, as well as we reached out to one of the founders who helped fund Operation Railroad, Glenn Beck and his wife, and they were kind enough to give us a little bit of information about their contributions, which were so kind and generous to help get this off the ground. So we'll get to all of that tonight. But going back through all this. Joyce, welcome tonight.
Thanks.
All right. Great.
Thanks. So sorry. Technology, it can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So
Yes. And it's always your worst enemy right when you need it the most.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely. So we were going through impressions of the show. Celeste, I know this one hit particularly hard for you.
Yep.
Tell us about your experience with this.
Well, I honestly wasn't planning on going to see it because I'm a very visual person. So if I see something, it affects me much more deeply than reading about it or someone telling me about it. So I knew if I saw it, see, this is why I didn't want to talk, but I knew it would affect me, and it was hard. It was good though. It was a good movie, but man, tough to watch as a mom. So
yeah, I think I can understand that. I can understand that, but it's hard because it's like nobody wants to know this information. Like this is the reason why, and not slighting you at all, Celeste. I'm glad you were brave enough to go, but there's a lot of people who are like, I just don't want to know this stuff. I don't want to know that this is happening because it is so horrendous. Like you can't imagine. And tonight I'm just Corey, the podcast guy with you guys. I'm not here representing any law enforcement organization officially, but I am in law enforcement and I have worked this material. And it's funny when I tell people, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I work cyber, and part of my job when crimes against children was under cyber, it was called internet crimes against children. And that was in the earlier days. And then when every single crime in the world involved a computer, they started breaking up those programs out of cyber and just left us with intrusions and took crimes against children and gave it to violent crimes. And they work it now. So, but also when I was in Mexico for 4 years working my law enforcement job, I had the crimes against children program because in Mexico, it's under cyber. And for 4 years, I had a front row seat to the global problem. I mean, we have it, and I'll get more into it. I don't want to get off topic, but I know, Celeste, it's hard because people don't want to hear my stories. They don't want to hear what I work. So a lot of times I gloss over it, or I don't even bring it up because people are like, oh my gosh, like, how do you work that stuff? And that's horrible. Yeah. And they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to be my friend, and they don't want me around because of the stuff I had to work. So
yeah, it's tough stuff, but we're grateful you and people like you do what you do. So
absolutely. My sister and I went and saw it just today. I hadn't had a chance to see it. And so I said, I'd heard so many things about it, and I've watched quite a few interviews about it and, TikTok videos, people talking about it. So, really had an interest in it. And my sister and I sat there at the end of it, and she said to me, I should be crying, but my meds won't let me. like she was like, it's hard to take. It's just really hard to take. And, you look in the faces of those little children. I was also really grateful that they were really like this. The way the movie was done, I thought was so appropriate in that they didn't show things that were lurid. They showed expressions on faces. They showed things enough to suggest things. So you didn't have to watch the violence against children. It was just suggested that it was happening.
It was implied.
Yeah. So I thought that was so beautifully done because you didn't need to see it to understand the horror of it.
Yeah. You saw it through the character's eyes. That's what I loved about the movie is you saw it through the character's eyes. Like when you saw them reacting, that's what you felt, and that's what I liked about it.
And another thing, I heard a comment, or I don't know if it was a TikTok video or where I heard it, but someone said something I thought was really interesting about how quiet the movie was in terms of there wasn't a ton of dialogue. I mean, if you think about it, there were so many scenes that like they didn't over explain anything. You kind of had to pick up on some of those details. Like they would show you the locations. They would show you a little bit about what was going on. They didn't have to overemphasize it. And there were a number of scenes between, the main character and the children where like there wasn't a lot of dialogue going on in what they were saying, but just in the expression, in the situation. And that quiet was powerful, like more powerful than I think the dialogue would have been.
Absolutely.
It's like they took Celeste and had her go on a ride along. And on that ride along,
For
and on
reals.
that ride along, like that's the way the movie was.
Yeah.
You're on a ride along and you don't know what's going to happen that night. And that night they rescued a kid and you're there to witness it. You're not part of the interviews. You don't know what's being said. They're talking cop talk or whatever, but you're seeing it play out and you're on scene. And I think that was beautifully done.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
you said, they didn't lecture you. They didn't go down like, oh, look at the statistics and blah, 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 blah. It was just that look at what this guy has to go through. Look what he has to type up on a computer. Look what he has to watch. He has to watch these horrid videos and then type up a description
What he
so
saw.
it can be
Yeah.
read in court. Because you can't show those videos to the jury. You have to write as a report.
Well, and there were a number of times, of course, there were a number of times I cried, but there were a number of times I just wanted to cheer. You know, like the one part was when he had convinced the pedophile that he was also a pedophile. And then he finally gets the information he needs. And he just, the way he smiles and he's like, you're under arrest. And because you're kind of like, okay, I think he's playing him. He didn't explain to us that he was playing him, but I think he's playing him. And how's this going to play out? And then when he won, because he got this guy to believe him and got the information he needed, I just wanted to cheer. It was just, yeah.
That from a law enforcement perspective, that was beautifully done because too many movies preempt and say, this guy's undercover and he's going to play a bad guy. And then you go in there and you're like, he's acting. What they allowed you to see was that he had to adopt the role of a pedophile.
Right.
He had to agree with him. He had to like him. He had to befriend him. And could you imagine having to do that? You know, it's like when I've done stuff like that, it's just it's not playing a role. People will see right through the fake. You have to, like, he had to do that. It was brilliantly done.
Yeah.
It made the audience think that, what's he doing?
Right.
Why is he
Exactly.
doing
By the
those
way-
things?
Right.
By the way, spoiler warning for everybody.
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah. That's a spoiler.
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Oops.
I guess we got into them a little earlier than what I thought we were going to.
All right.
Spoiler
Sorry.
warning. That's okay. No, we're good. We're good.
This
So-
doesn't spoil the movie. Trust me. Those little
No,
details.
that's just one
spoil the
little
movie.
section. So
Yeah, but it's still considered a spoiler. So we will we'll get a little bit more in depth on this, but I wanted to give kind of a bird's eye view of everybody's feelings and reactions on this. Obviously, I think everybody here would agree that if we were rating this movie, it would be pretty high up there.
Oh, yeah.
Celeste, it hit you pretty emotionally. I know you and I have had many conversations about this since then.
yeah, and I knew it would.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it's hard to watch. But why? The real question is, why is this happening in our society now? Why is this such a huge thing? And we have some insights on that with an interview that Celeste and I did with Brett Bunker. And I found his title. He was on the board of governor's chair for Operation Underground Railroad. He was with them in a fundraising capacity for many years, but he did work on some other situations as well. And he talks about that during our interview with him, which we'll play here in just a few moments. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about this movie as a whole. And for some reason, it has become controversial. I don't understand why. You would think this is a topic everybody can rally around. And for some reason, it has really become sort of a strange thing where you've got magazines like Rolling Stone saying if you're that it's like a QAnon fantasy or something. So those who are not familiar with QAnon, it's kind of what they call the right-wing conspiracy theorists, like this shadowy QAnon, you're believing in tinfoil hat stuff. It's really just a way to discredit and say, we don't like what you're saying if you're a conservative, but that's the label they're slapping on it. So they're saying it's fantasy. This isn't happening. I've heard people
QAnon
saying
only came out about 3 years ago.
exactly.
Like
Yeah.
the word QAnon only came out like 3 years ago, and it was used to slander Trump supporters.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are some wackadoos that believe that there's lizard people running the government and that there's, craziness. And then they lump this movie into those types of, like aliens and lizard people and
Yeah.
people
Yeah, and
drinking the blood of babies and things and just
I saw an interview with Tim Ballard, and he's like, "This movie was made 4 years ago. Nobody even knew what it was."
5 years ago. 5
Yeah,
years ago.
5 years ago. And so he's like, I still don't know what it is. Like, he was very
Well,
clear.
QAnon didn't exist 5 years ago. So
Right. When the movie
and the
was
movie
made.
was
So,
written. The movie was written 8 years ago. So
right.
8 years ago, the word QAnon never was in the vocabulary of the internet or anybody's lips, and they're throwing this movie into the conspiracies of QAnon. So
Yeah.
So what's happening then when everybody's saying this is QAnon, this is conspiracy theory, this is craziness?
it's not everybody. It's the
Okay, all right. The
so
left.
Who knows what
you
the
know what I'm
reference-
talking about. So those
Yeah.
people who keep saying that, who keep saying that this is conspiracy theory, there's other things that are happening that are crazy around this movie at the same time. And I want to talk about that for just a moment because once or twice, if it happens in a movie theater here or a movie theater there, okay, I can understand that coincidence. But what's happening over and over and over again throughout the country is really interesting but really kind of sad at the same time. And what I've done is kind of put together, I found some things online and kind of compiled a list and took some other people's compilations and made a list of just some of the things that are happening. So it's really weird. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's kind of a crazy thing. Let me show this to you and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I was like super curious, so I came to see it, and the lights didn't turn out for the first 10 minutes. And also there was like a voiceover.
Can you turn up the volume?
People.
In the bathroom, Tim regards himself in the mirror. He splashes water off his face. In daylight, Tim enters the sunny foyer of the home. Odor.
We're already starting the movie. Hold on.
We're standing like all in the movie theater. We're getting refunds for the Sound of Freedom because apparently the water pressure in the bathrooms are working here. So now we can watch the movie.
There were other people in there, and now they're all gone. And the radio is playing over the movie. Lights are still on. The radio is still playing, but they restarted the movie.
More as to why this movie in particular is not playing, and are you having issues in other theaters, or is it just the Sound of Freedom? So it's just this theater you're having an issue playing movies in right now? Okay, no surprise there. Thank you.
So I personally went to go see the movie yesterday, and lo and behold, there was no AC in our theater. And although I'd seen videos about it on TikTok, I was extremely shocked. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. So I walked out of the theater and went to 4 other theater rooms, and they were all working with AC, like a literal icebox.
So we couldn't see it tomorrow. Here's the manager. Okay, but we have a single time with money in theaters until there's AC in one place. Thank you.
That's crazy. So, like I said, 1 movie theater, okay, maybe 2 movie theaters, okay, I can kind of understand what's going on. But what's happening is every movie theater that's having an issue with this, it's just the theater that's playing Sound of Freedom, and it's everything from the fire alarms going off, the sound isn't working. In one of those in the video, the guy had the music playing over the sound of the movie. They couldn't hear it. People are saying the theater is telling them the air conditioner isn't working, and they're getting a refund for their tickets. Corey, what's going on with this movie?
Well, I if you know the old Shakespeare phrase, "Thou dost protest too much." So I think the people who are protesting the hardest against this movie are probably the ones who are worried about this information getting out. Now, it's all I'm going to say. I'm not saying they're pedophiles, but it doesn't. But if you were a pedophile and you did work in the media and you did work at the theater, or you were a consumer of, sex trafficking, I don't think you want this information out. And, if you think your name's on a list somewhere or your face is in a video somewhere and you're worried that this stuff's going to come out or somebody's going to finger you as a consumer of this type of material, why would you not do everything you can to discredit the movie?
And I think that you don't even have to be a pedophile. You just support the power structure. Like, you may know that, like,
Well, that's the other aspect of it. That's
Exactly.
the other aspect of it. Yeah.
Right. So
But I think-
it might not be that someone is directly guilty of that particular crime, but they're not willing to stand up against it because they know people who know people who know people, and they just know
Yeah.
it. They're safer if they just don't mess with it.
So here's the thing. All 4 of us here have seen the movie. Did any of y'all have issues with your movie?
I did not personally know.
I did. Ours didn't start for 40 minutes past the time it was supposed to. And they kept coming in and they're saying, we can't get it to work. It won't turn on. We're not sure what's going on. Once it finally started, it was cutting in and out of like the trailers or the movie clips before. And they were trying to say, we're not sure if we can get it to work. Now, granted, I don't think it was a theater because they had like it on a bajillion different screens. I don't know if it was an individual or if it's just, Satan not wanting this to be shared. I don't know what was causing the issue, but ours started 40 minutes late, and none of us.
I would put it past
we all
sabotage.
sat there.
I would have put it past sabotage.
Yep.
It could have been
So-
an employee that's politically, politically motivated, and they went in there and sabotaged or pulled a plug on something or created problems that
Yep.
needed somebody to go in and troubleshoot it for 40 minutes.
Right.
Yep. But we all sat there and waited and waited and
Yep.
waited, and it finally started.
So the other issue, I don't understand why this is politically motivated, but I mean, when I first started my career in 2004 and started working this material right away, like right out of the academy, during that 3-year period, I talked to, some other agents, and I said, because we were reading some of the websites. There's this group called NAMDA, it's like
NAMBLA.
National Organization of Man Boy Love, right? And their sole purpose is to normalize pedophilia and to and have them be included in society as a sexual
Right.
preference. And this was back in like the early 2000s. And I told an agent once, I said, hey, I wouldn't put it past, give it 10 years. I said, give it 10 years or maybe near the end of my career. And I've been in my career 19 years. I said, don't put it past society normalizing pedophilia and making it normal in society. And they all went, no, that would never happen. This is the most disgusting stuff in the world. Like, no way would society normalize this.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing it, where they're changing the name pedophilia to, minor attracted persons. They're already changing the vernacular to dull people's senses into normalizing this behavior.
Well, and I'm of the belief that there is a faction in society who is doing that. I don't think the majority of society supports that.
No, it's
I
always a
think they're-
faction. They're the loudest,
Right.
most obnoxious people you'll ever meet.
And they're
And they're the ones
they're
that
becoming
scream.
less afraid, right? Yeah, and I think you're right. That's what we're seeing. But
No,
I do think
we're becoming more afraid. So when
Right, but-
people scream and they call you names, they call you a racist and a bigot and a homophobe and all these names, that's when you get scared and you're like, I don't want to speak up. So when they say we want to normalize pedophilia, you say, I'm not saying a thing.
right. And like what I was saying is the factions are less afraid. Like they're more brazen than they ever used to be, and they're kind of
Well,
willing to
again,
get
go back to the 80s. If we went back to the 80s, there would have been protests in the streets. There would have been bricks going through windows if organizations were trying to normalize pedophilia. But over time, because of using of language and insulting and hurting people and trying to cancel them and trying to ruin their lives, people are like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to speak up. And so that emboldens them to be able to come out and say, hey, this movie is a Christian movie, which it's not. And it's, it's a movie about QAnon, which it's not. And, it's just, I just see that the trend is leaning to trying to normalize it.
So is that what's happening then with these theaters and what's going on in there? Because like I said,
there's a few people are going in and sabotaging on purpose. They're
who do you
pulling
think
fire
it is?
alarms.
Do you think it's workers, or do you think it's other people going to the theaters that are
It
causing
could
the
be
problem?
somebody going to the theater. They're like, hey, I'm going to go watch, whatever movies in there. And they know they see Sound of Freedom and they sneak in the back and pull the fire alarm, or they see the controls for the air conditioning unit and they turn that off, or they go up or it could be an employee who says, hey, I'm going to pull the audio cable and take it with me. And it takes 40 minutes to find another one and plug it back in. So there could be a lot of things where it's just an individual, who's politically motivated to go in and try to stop this movie because they falsely or purposely think that this movie is doing people harm.
Yeah, I read a report that they had reached out to the president of AMC Theaters for a comment on this. And his comment was, we are in the business of showing movies and making money off of these. And so we're not in the business of sabotaging our own product. However, they are looking into these cases, but if they are individual cases, it's going to be on a case-by-case situation. So each theater, maybe the theaters where something's going on, they have somebody working there, that's on break or whatever, or they're tired of filling popcorn buckets and they're going in the back and, well, I'm just going to, turn off the air conditioning. And I could understand if a theater's air conditioning goes out, but when it happens to multiple theaters just for that movie, and it's not happening across any other movies, then you've got to say, this is beyond a conspiracy theory. This is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's sad that a movie like this would generate a response from somebody who feels like maybe they're in their young 20s or something like that, but they are some sort of activist and they've got to go and sabotage this. That to me is disgusting. If you're going to go sabotage something, okay, go sabotage a Christian movie because you're an atheist or whatever. But when it comes to kids, that should be something we can all rally behind. And I just don't understand the whole situation of this indoctrination that people go through where they just feel like, I'm going to sabotage something because I don't like it. And my little group that we've got over here is saying that it's bad. So therefore I'm going to attack it without really doing any sort of foresight, homework, understanding whether or not this is actually happening.
Yeah, I think also I'll give the people these situations the benefit of the doubt, which I try to do as a law enforcement person. I try to be, right in the middle and understand both sides of the story. Now, there is a thing called social contagion, and the internet makes it 10 times worse, is that somebody posted that, hey, somebody sabotaged our movie. A couple of wackadoos out there hear about it, whether they say, hey, that's a great idea, or they're just like, hey, that'd be a fun practical joke, and I'm a dumb teenager. And then they go start doing stuff. It becomes a contagion. So I don't know if it's a movement rather than maybe a contagion.
And Satan.
Yeah.
That was my take. I'm like, either he's inspiring people to do not so good, or maybe he's kind of doing not so good. I just can't help but think that he's obviously in the mix of it.
Well, look at the statistics, right? So everybody assumes pedophilia is like, it's like 15 guys in the United States doing all the pedophilia. It's not. And when you look at the law enforcement statistics of how many cases that we work, it is unbelievable the types of people that are doing it, the people who you would never think in a million years. And I worked in Salt Lake, my first office. So it was disturbing to go into homes and see temple pictures on the wall and have to talk to people about this stuff. And why are they looking at it? And why is it on their computer? Or we arrest them out in the street because they were chatting with some undercover online and thought they were meeting a 13-year-old for sex. And we arrest them in a parking lot of a 7-Eleven. And then go back to their house to execute a search warrant. And we find, temple pictures on the wall and Book of Mormons by their bed. And you're going, it's everywhere. And if it's everywhere, and a lot of people are doing it, not just 15 guys, everybody thinks it's just a bunch of dirty people and it's not a big population, but somebody is consuming these millions of children and the millions of material. Somebody's downloading that stuff.
Yep.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the group behind this movie, Operation Underground Railroad. Joyce, are you familiar with them?
Yeah, a little bit. I will tell you, I was at a young women's camp once, and we had some representatives from Operation Underground Railroad come and talk to the young women. So that was just really moving. But they talked about the purpose, made the girls aware, kind of trained them on a little bit on things to look out for. I'm certainly not an expert, but it's a tremendous organization. And they've got a great website that gives a lot of really good information in terms of it gives some facts and statistics, things you can do on social media. So they've got some really good resources there as you're kind of looking at what if you want to get some more information. So
absolutely. And so for anybody who's not familiar with them, Tim Ballard, let's kind of tell this story a little bit. Celeste, do you know Tim's story?
Do I know Tim's story?
Yeah. Personally? Do you want to tell us a little bit about how this all began, or do you remember that from
the
movie?
Just from the movie. I mean, I know it from the movie.
Okay. All right.
So was he? Well, I mean, you're probably better at articulating.
Okay.
This,
all right. So I won't put you on the spot like that.
Yeah. I'm like,
okay.
I can do it if you want me to.
I kind of felt like putting you on the spot, so
thanks.
I'll save you though. I'll bail you out. So Tim Ballard was a federal agent for 12 years. He worked for Department of Homeland Security, I believe. Right, Corey?
Yeah.
And he went on, and it sort of kind of gives this story in the movie. So the spoiler warnings here of just a little bit about how this kind of all came about. And I don't think it really gave the complete story. So maybe this isn't super spoiler warnings, but just in case, if somebody doesn't want to know anything about the movie, now's the time to mute. Tim had gone through and had been assigned some of these sex trafficking cases. And he had been assigned to some down in, I want to say, Colombia. And he kind of got to a point where he was running out of resources. He was overstepping his bounds because he could not. There was only so much he could do. His hands were kind of tied in his position. And Corey certainly knows how this operates. You've got certain parameters that you have to operate in. And he came to a point where he's like, I have to uncuff my hands and be able to do this. I have to be able to move forward with this. And he felt like he didn't know how to do this. He wasn't sure about quitting his job and simply starting a nonprofit and moving forward in all of this. And he was like, how do I tell my wife? I think he was close to getting vested in his retirement, which Corey can probably attest. PERS is kind of a nice thing, right? So in those situations, like he's like, I'm giving up everything, and this is what I feel like I need to do. How do I sell that to my wife? And apparently she was having the same. Yeah, go ahead,
Everett,
Joyce.
I heard an interview with Tim Ballard, which this is really beautiful. But he said when he called his wife, he said, I was being a coward. And I said, I got to come home. I can't quit my job. I can't do these things. And he called her and, expecting her to say, yeah, you're right. You should come home. And she said to him, you have to do that. So he said, when he was sort of kind of being a coward, it was his wife who said, you have to do that. And she said to him, do not put my salvation on the line. Like, she was so committed to this that she said, don't you quit, because I do not want my salvation to be in jeopardy because of that. So I thought it was really beautiful because, they show her in the movie as being like, she's only a couple of lines, but that is such an important one because she said, like, you do this. She gave him the courage to continue to do that and gave him permission to, quit your job. So I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah. And the strength and courage something like that must take when you have little ones at home and you're like, this needs to happen. I don't care. The Lord will open the doors. And so one of the doors that opened, we will talk about a little bit later, was Tim went to Glenn Beck and said, look, I've got this thing I'm trying to put together and organize, but clearly when you're starting a nonprofit, you're going to need some funding to go behind that. And where does that come from? Right. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but this was the birth of Operation Underground Railroad, where he could start this nonprofit and start working on his own, not having to worry about the U.S. government and their rules of operation and things, where he could actually work with local law enforcement in those countries under the parameters he wanted to actually become effective in these sort of things. So we reached out to somebody who worked with Operation Underground Railroad. We talked about him earlier, Brett Bunker. And Celeste and I were lucky enough to get an interview with him. It's a little bit choppy at times because we grabbed him when we could. We sort of had a moment where he was free and we got what we could get out of it. So there might be a few spots in there where the audio is a little choppy, but it kind of cleans up after a little bit. And we sort of condensed and edited the interview just so we could play it here and not take up too much time. But I want to play this for you, and then we'll talk about some of the things he discusses, because he certainly goes into what Corey was discussing about how this isn't just a handful of guys off in some weird country that are just doing this on their own. And once you catch those bad guys, I mean, this is everywhere. We're talking, like Corey was saying, in Utah, we're talking missionaries, we're talking stake presidents, bishops. This is happening, and it's in an alarming rate. And let me play this for you, and we'll talk about it afterwards. I think it's going to kind of raise some further questions.
Brett, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So, when I was 22, a bishop gave me a blessing, and it was one of those times where I knew that the words were not coming from the man having his hands on my head. He was my bishop, and he said, God will bless you with money if you use it to help other people, but he'll take it away if you just use it for yourself. It sunk straight to my heart, and I've always been service-oriented, but it took me a long time to find where that was taking me. So in 2013, I was driving to work and listening to Glenn Beck, and he was talking about kids being sold for sex, and my mind was blown. I didn't know that was a thing or it was a problem. I immediately just thought, I have a mom, I had one daughter at the time. I'm not okay with this. Where do I sign up? And I I went to their website. They were hiding at the time because Tim was still at the time going undercover on operations. And because of that, they weren't sure if they could show his face publicly, even though he was the founder, because he still needed that obscured view from the camera. I started showing up and they were like, who are you? Why are you showing up? And I said, I'm a volunteer. And they were like, we don't have a volunteer. So I just got started and I found out that I have a lot of skills that were able to help. I met a lot of amazing friends along the way. And I served 3.5 years as the Board of Governors chair with OUR, which ended in 2020. And then I spent the last 2 years with another group helping vulnerable women, providing them resources and giving them access to things that they would not otherwise have. So I found that the vulnerable population, meaning homeless populations, foster children, even there's a lot of trafficking going on where girls will go to school during the day, go meet up with their trafficker after work and sleep in their own bed. So some parents see their kids every night and have no idea what's going on. So I'm going on almost 11 years.
How prevalent is something like that?
It's becoming one of the traffickers' number one tools. So what'll happen is a guy that's over 40 will right-click a good-looking young man's picture and use that as his profile pic, and he will just go into online games, Minecraft, Roblox, all these games that kids like to play, and they start chatting it up as if they are an 18-year-old good-looking guy. And so the appeal to these kids. This isn't the only way it happens, but one of the big things that happens is the man will then solicit an inappropriate picture. And once that girl sends that picture, then they start to say, hey, I've been on all your social networks. I know your mom. I know all your friends. Send me more pictures. This is what I want, or I will send this out. And so it just becomes this rabbit hole. And I get it. It's hard to say, hey, mom and dad, I really screwed up, or even going to a principal at school, because it's happening a lot at school. Even in schools, I live in Utah. Here in Utah, there are clubs where high school young men will ask their girlfriend for a picture. So the girlfriend thinks, hey, he's going to like me a little more if I send him this pic. We're going to be bonded. Here in Utah, they turn them into flip books. That boy will take that picture and immediately share it, exploiting that girl over and over. And put into the wrong hands or sent to the wrong person, it can really put that young woman in danger. So 100% of us watching this video need to sit down with our kids and say, hey, these cell phones can be used for good or bad. One of the tools I use with my own kids, I will pull up news reports of things that happened, of people that were busted. So it's not me sharing one of my stories. They're able to read someone else, and you don't have to look very far. By the way, talking to your young men, our young men, is a great idea as well, because if an under 18-year-old gets a picture that's inappropriate of an underage girl and shares it, he could, in Utah, you could be on the sex offender registry for the rest of your life just for receiving and sharing that picture. So it's a big deal on both sides for the guys and the girls.
So you were with Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, for 8 years, did you say?
Almost 8 years, yes.
Almost 8 years, okay. In your time with OUR, what was your experience with them? Did you get to go on any missions? What kind of capacity were you with them?
I had the blessing multiple times to go participate in OUR's aftercare centers. So prior to a rescue, OUR, when they know they're going to operate in a certain country or jurisdiction, they will go start supporting aftercare centers. So they'll go in, they want to find which ones take care of the kids well. Faith-based programs actually help the kids heal a lot faster than without faith, and that's a faith across the board. So they start working with these orphanages and aftercares, and before a rescue happens, they'll start reaching out to some of these orphanages and say, hey, next week or next month, we're expecting an influx of 10 to 15 kids. How many kids can we place there? And post-rescue, they follow up with those kids on a very frequent basis. I worked with Aftercare for a long time and supported that group, and they've rescued a lot of kids now. It's thousands and thousands, and so they have a lot of programs in place to follow up with these kids and make sure their care is being taken care of. And I have personally met many of these young, I call them angels. They're daughters of God, which makes them my sisters. So I've met with a lot of these angels, and they do so well. Yes, they've experienced things that I will never comprehend, and it's just, they've been through some really hard things, but I have seen so many miracles happen. I had a 12-year-old girl. We ended up going on a mission to Peru, and so many miracles happened on this trip. One of the biggest miracles was we knew it was her birthday week, but because we were working with so many orphanages, getting the scheduling down to, we were crisscrossing the country and trying to make everything work. Well, she called it a miracle because we ended up in her aftercare center on her birthday. And it melted my heart for so many reasons. So the caretakers in her particular aftercare were Catholic nuns. She said, I'd like to take everyone to KFC for my birthday. What I didn't understand was I thought we were celebrating her birthday. She was giving for her birthday. We sit down to eat. She stands up and starts refilling the drinks of the nuns. Can I get you more fries? She is literally handing out her food on her birthday. And after she takes care of the nuns, which I thought was just heartwarming, she starts serving her classmates. And I want to touch on this for just a second. Service is one of the number one ways to access the healing power of the atonement. Somehow this little angel understood that. And I did a magic show. There was a clown show and then a magic show to celebrate. And I have this trick that features whoever is the last participant. And we had her up to finish. We were all cracking up. And then something amazing happened. Something beautiful happened. She looked up at the end of the magic show and she said, if every day was this happy, I would live to be 1,000. Oh. And all of us that were down there to serve her just thought, wow, we've all had our trials, and sometimes it's hard to stand up with our trials. We don't know what it's like to go what this 12-year-old's been through, and for her to say I'd live to be through 1,000, it just kind of puts things into perspective.
Where would you say that the most trafficking is occurring right now? Where are the biggest problems?
I signed up to help kids in third world countries because immediately I assumed that's where the problem was. 5 years ago, Utah, county in Utah reached out, and this is actually, there's a Daily Herald article about this. A county reached out and said, hey, we'd like to look into your training. And a local company sponsored the software and the training that they needed. 100 men were arrested in the following 12 months in the town I live in. Oh, just to give you an idea of the problem is everywhere. So domestically, OUR fights this by supporting law enforcement with a variety of tools and training. And most police departments jaws drop when they see what they're able to do with some of these high-tech resources. I love law enforcement. They're very good at what they do. I feel like they are understaffed and don't have access to all the training they need. So OUR is a great partner to bring a lot of the access to the tools and technology to help them have access to help additional people.
You know, in the movie, it was stating that in The Sound of Freedom that, America is actually the main source that pays for these types of things. Like, we're funding the majority of this as U.S. citizens. I think yeah. So that is kind of eye-opening because I would have assumed, again, like you, that it's more third world country. It's more like, the poorer countries where the kids are being taken and stuff. But I mean, I guess it takes a richer country to be able to afford to buy these children. And it's just, I was just shocked by it. I was just shocked.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that kind of tourism is now happening in all of our backyards. It used to be that you had to travel to find it, and now it's happening here, and it's an epidemic.
Let me switch gears real quick and talk about the movie a little bit. You've seen it. So what is your initial reaction to the movie?
Loved it. I felt like they did a fantastic job portraying a father in a third world country trying to better his situation, and ended up handing that little angel over with a smile to a woman that was smiling at him. I have personally experienced that happening myself. I've worked in a village where girls are 70% likely to be trafficked, and most of the traffickers walk in and meet the parents. They're wearing suits. They offer different opportunities and grants and things. So the accuracy of the story, it was several stories put together, and I actually loved how they put it together, because even though it was several stories, you got to watch what someone's journey might look like. And at the end of the day, you got to see how one of the ways OUR used to rescue the kids and help them out. So I felt like they did a fantastic job portraying the problem. And they talked about how many kids are being trafficked. I'd kind of like to talk about for a minute how many of us are the problem. Like, how many of us are going out and exchanging things of value for sex? If you look at enough pornography, the only way to get a high in some cases is to actually cross that bridge and do things that neither of us would be proud of. So, we are the demand, and we need to realize that I have met 0 women that enjoy what they do. I've met women that experienced massive trauma when they were younger that they weren't able to deal with. And that trauma is actually the anchor that keeps them stuck in this field. And I've met women that were doing it just to survive, just to get off the street on a cold night. And it broke my heart. But the beautiful thing is, if you can offer healing resources to these women and make them so they go from feeling invisible and forgotten to visible and seen, they start to make decisions to get themselves out of it. And I have personally witnessed many of these women and kids getting off the street and making their own decisions and actually living a productive life. I've seen many of them turn around and become advocates and sharing their experience to hopefully help others.
And what about human trafficking awareness classes? I know you had mentioned that to me. Why don't you share a little bit on that?
So one statistic I saw said that 70% of kids that are trafficked in America have been on a flight. So that hit me hard. I fly a lot for work and I go on some vacations, and I just thought, how many times have I been right next to somebody that was literally a prisoner or a slave and didn't know what to look for? So one of the great resources I love is from the Maloof Foundation. It's called On Watch. It's a free anti-human trafficking awareness course, and the link is at the bottom of the screen here. Take that class. Because I know what I'm watching for. I come across women that are suffering from exploitation in my hometown. I took my kids to a scooter park 3 weeks ago. We were sitting at lunch and I identified a woman. One thing I wanted to talk about really fast is, if you identify someone that's suffering from exploitation, it's not a good idea to intervene. It is a good idea to call the authorities, or there's a human trafficking hotline by the Polaris Project. It's easy to remember, 888-3737-888. You probably just memorized it. They actually keep some great statistics. There's other resources on their website. It's the Polaris Project. And it's such a big problem. There's more people suffering from slavery right now than there were during the transatlantic slave trade when it was legal.
So once again, here on the screen, the human trafficking hotline. I am definitely going to take a look at the On Watch training. I think that's important. I would not have the foggiest idea what to look for.
Neither would I. So thank you for sharing that.
That's a fantastic idea. Great place to start. Well, Brett, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing the message. I love this, and I know you're going to bless a lot of people's lives by your message tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you for your time.
All right. Interesting stuff. So, Corey, I want to kind of lean on you a little bit because he had mentioned some things here in the interview that you had talked about as well. And one of them was just the prevalence of what's going on. He had mentioned in his hometown there in Utah, 100 people that were caught in a sex trafficking sting. That blows my mind. I don't know what town he lives in, so I can't give you the data on that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I'd actually expect it to be more, to be honest with you. But it's we do national roundups in the United States where we all go out and do massive roundups. It doesn't get a lot of press play, but you do hear about these rescues. I mean, it just doesn't surprise me at all because it's when I was working this stuff earlier in my career, it was in Utah. I mean, I was assigned to Utah, and I was shocked. Being new at this and working that material, I was truly shocked when I thought, and this is how naive I was coming in. When I heard child pornography, I literally thought, before I ever saw the stuff, I literally thought it was weirdos putting two kids in bed and making them perform adult acts. And so it was child pornography. I had no idea it was adults with children, and it almost split my brain. I couldn't comprehend. I'm like, this is not real. This was just, it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then
one of the things
it blew my mind, the age groups, like it blew my mind. Like people will ask me, oh, so are we talking 13-year-olds? I'm like, and younger. And they're like, you mean like 5-year-olds? And I'm like, and younger. And then I say, you don't want to know. You want to stop right there because you won't be able to wrap your mind around it, and it will drive you insane.
Yeah, I always thought when they talked about child pornography, I thought that they meant like, okay, well, she's 17, she was faking it, she wasn't really 18 or something like that. Like I did not think that there was an appetite for little kids, but clearly I was wrong. One of the things that we had talked with Brett about that we had to sort of clip out just due to time, he mentioned that the youngest that he's seen is 6 months. He said typically it is around 9 to 12, kind of that age range, but he's seen it all the way down to 6 months, obviously, and up. And I cannot understand why, where that.
Well, remember the Catch a Predator TV show, right? They had to cancel it because apparently, and this is what I read, not that I personally know, but apparently somebody came in and they were a pretty prominent person and they committed suicide. And so they had to cancel the show because they were worried that in the future they might have more deaths on their hand because they were confronting these guys who were chatting with what they thought were young 13, 12-year-old girls online. And, I thought the show was great, but it hindered a lot of our investigations. So I wasn't a huge fan of that show because a lot of, we were doing really good at catching predators, and then To Catch a Predator comes out, and then everybody online was asking our undercovers, I want to see you on camera. How do I know you're not this, you're not 2020? How do I know you're not Catch a Predator? And it really hindered our investigations for the sensationalization of, the stuff we saw, on that TV show. But I mean, when you see that show and you see like doctors, lawyers, like you brought this up, Everett, it, in a sense, people would think my faith was shaken, working in Utah. But I think what really strengthened my testimony was that like the church is true, but that the people are not true. Yeah. And I don't mean not true in a sense that they're not on a true course, and not everybody is, and you can't judge the church for that. So, when I first was seeing this stuff and, hearing from fellow agents that were saying, I had to arrest a stake president, I had to arrest a bishop, I had to, and it's like, You would think that would shake testimony, but it just showed that everybody's vulnerable to this. Everybody.
Yeah. Where does it start? Where does it come from? Brett
You know,
had
that's a
mentioned
good
it a little
question.
bit in his interview with us. He had talked about kind of this ever-growing need to consume more pornography and the sexualization of America.
Yeah, it is addiction. I think, and I used to give talks at church about this, so it's similar to what I'm doing now. I would say I would go and talk about the dangers of pornography, adult pornography, because it sends you down it's just like drugs. It plays on your mind and your body like drugs. There is a huge dopamine hit. The only issue is it's not external chemical that's hitting your dopamine. It's your own chemicals in your body that are hitting the dopamine. So where you might watch two people making love in a porn video, and then you're like, I'm bored. That doesn't do it for me anymore. So then you're looking for harder stuff, dirtier stuff, kinkier stuff, right? And then eventually your dopamine levels, level out. Your body levels out at that, and you want more. And then maybe you accidentally stumble upon, barely legal porn, right? And you start looking at that. And maybe they are actresses that are 20 or 18 but look 14. And then that path takes you down a path of, where you are like, how did my fetish get to a 12-year-old? How did my fetish get to a prepubescent woman? And so we always talked about those dangers. There are people who say this thing, got out of control. We'd interview them. Now, some of it also could be victims. They could have been victims themselves when they were kids, and so they seek out the material, I think, to make them feel maybe maybe they're not the only ones in the world. Like, look, it's happened to other kids. I don't feel so bad about what happened to me. I don't know if that's part of it. It could be. And the other thing to also consider is that this has been a problem since humans left the Garden of Eden. This has not saying that Adam and all that had the problem, but I say that as soon as human beings started populating towns and cities and started cohabitating, that this was a problem throughout human history. Sodom and Gomorrah, all the, the Tower of Babel, Babylon, all of this, to the point that the Savior himself had to address it in his time when he talked about if you offend one of these little ones. So if he had to bring that up, this has been going on forever.
And we're in a time in society when everything is instant and it's at our fingertips. And so, whereas you might have had to go out and find something before, you literally can sit in your home at your computer and have access to all of this right away, right now, right this minute, and I also think we live in a society that is, we have so much discretionary time compared to any other time in history. And so people are just bored with life sometimes. And I think what you talked about, that they just kind of get bored and are looking for something to stimulate. And instead of going out and finding good and worthwhile things to do, they sit at their computer. Yeah. We're certainly not making that better for future generations when they spend so much time on screens. But yeah, that's the expectation, I think, is everything is instantly available. And it is.
The technology is what's the really danger thing. And parents are super naive to what's going on. When I was starting out in the early 2000s, right, we had flip phones. And then they introduced technology on those flip phones called MMS, multimedia messaging, right? Mm-hmm. And that is when when I first heard the term sexting, I didn't know what that was, and I was an investigator. And I got a call from a high school that said, "Hey, we have a 14-year-old girl that sent pictures to an 18-year-old man." Now, the 18-year-old man was a senior in high school. The 14-year-old girl was in the same school, and he distributed that to other kids in the school. And so we sat down with him and his parents and said, "Now, in the federal system, we don't have a juvenile system." But I explained to him, I said, you realized you distributed, that you produced and you distributed child pornography. You asked her for a picture and she produced it. You're the director. You produced child pornography, and then you distributed it to other children. I mean, it was like 5 massive felonies in just one image that the guy asked for. And when he saw that, he turned white. His parents turned white. I said, I'm turning this over to the locals because we don't have a federal system for kids. But, just know that that's what you're doing. You guys are underage. What are you doing?
Yeah. So what ended up happening?
We turned it over to the locals. I'm sure that there was some prosecution, but, I was on to the next case. So, as long as somebody was looking into it. But, I like when I sit down with people like that and I give them the hard conversation and I lay it all out. And, and I told him, I said, you're 18. You're lucky that you're going to go local prosecution because the federal system, it's 15 years for every count of production. So if you produce 300 images times 15 years, so
you're in there for 45 years. We'll see you well after the jail.
Yeah.
Well, and I really appreciated with Ben in the video when he talked about sitting down with children and just sort of talking to them about kind of things that happen. Because I know, I have nieces and nephews and have worked with youth, and like sometimes they'll get a girlfriend who will say, hey, let me share a picture with you. Or, a boy might say, hey, just send me a picture, like just a risque picture or whatever. And like, you have no control over what happens with that, and if you send one and then you'll send another. And I just think like they don't think about that when they're just like, well, let's just send one picture to my boyfriend, and it can destroy their lives. I loved where he talked about like, they get embarrassed. They don't want to tell their parents, and then they start to be extorted.
We call it sextortion. So this became a trend. So as the technology changes, guys, like as this technology is changing and growing, and the phones are growing exponentially, and the power and the technology and the ability to stream and have video conferencing, I just saw this explosion in the exploitation of children in terms of, especially when I was in Mexico. We were part of an international task force where we went to annual conferences and met with all of our international law enforcement partners. And we sat around and we heard briefings after briefing after briefing of what was going on. And it's amazing the technology that's being used. For example, nowadays, WhatsApp is a big platform, right? And it's used around the world. And people were creating WhatsApp groups, and they were sharing pornography. They were sharing pictures with each other, and these rings were doing it all within an encrypted app. And when you go to WhatsApp, they're like, we don't store anything. We don't put anything on the server. Like, we don't have anything. And so it was very hard, to work those cases. We'd have to get one guy arrested, get his phone, get the people off the phone, and then get the pictures, and then, send leads out around the world. Like looks like a phone number from Germany. This looks like a phone number from, Sweden. And then the biggest purveyor right now, the technology that's really being used is video chat. So I know that sextortion is a big thing, right? So they start chatting. The girl, maybe she exposes herself on a live chat. The guy captures that and then goes back and says, if you don't want this posted online, you're going to do X, Y, Z, and you're going to, give me more pictures or pay me money. We've seen the sextortion with you're going to pay me money to keep these pictures off the internet. And then the last thing I would reference is pay-per-view. So it's called pay-per-view, but what they're doing is using Facebook Live. They're wiring money through Western Union to poor, desperate families in third world countries, and then they abuse children live on Facebook chat, live on Facebook, live broadcast. It's called pay-per-view, and the guy directs the families to molest the children online. And we actually took down somebody in Mexico that was doing that. A guy was arrested in somewhere in the States. We got his information, found out that he was doing this pay-per-view stuff. on Facebook Live, and then we were able to trace that back to a family in Michoacan, Mexico, and we were able to send the local law enforcement out to rescue the kid and arrest the aunt that was doing it. So, and that's just one case. There's thousands and thousands of those cases around the world.
So this is basically, I watched a podcast one time with a member of the Facebook Live. They were kind of the censor group that was responsible for going in and watching these videos and taking things down. And he was talking about how it's so graphic and it's so pervasive that they actually have counselors on staff, and at any time during their workday, when they're reviewing these videos, they can actually pull themselves out and go talk with this counselor. And he said some of the things are so horrific that people will post. And unfortunately, some of them are like, I don't even want to get into it. I don't know if YouTube will totally censor this, but it's just the worst things you can imagine being done to children, including ending all of it. We'll just put it that way. And he said there were times when the other members, when they would see these videos, would just break down crying. He's like, it's not a very uncommon thing for that to happen. And the sad part is they post this video. It's kind of in a private video chat. And then before they're able to get to it, they've already got thousands of people that have viewed the video and watched this before it can be taken down. I'm sure it's kind of the same thing with Corey, but I never even considered something where it's like a pay-per-view situation where a family's
that's hard to capture. That's hard to know that's going on, because that's a point-to-point connection. And especially on a Facebook end-to-end encryption, when somebody says, hey, do you have, I'm not Facebook, but WhatsApp, hey, do you have WhatsApp? Yeah. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. And I'm going to pay you, and we're going to do it on this encrypted app. And once the connection's severed, it's not stored anywhere. The abuse happened and it just vanishes into thin air, and that child has to live with it. And there's no evidence that it ever happened in terms of, that end-to-end encryption call, that phone call or the video call. So, it does happen all over the world. The biggest cases were in the Philippines. Where people were desperate. And in Africa, there was also some in Africa where these law enforcement guys were presenting these cases and saying, we took down these pay-per-view rings, and really, I really have to get, my hats off to all the guys who work this stuff around the world. Amazing people. I sat down with people from almost every country at these conferences, and they are just absolute, miracle workers. I know you talk about, it's hard to work this stuff, and you really have to compartmentalize it we go to annual safeguarding where we go see a psychologist, and we take a psychological exam where we answer 500 questions, and then they graph it all out and they say, yeah, you're still good to go. They ask you questions, any problems in the bedroom at home and things like that. Are you sleeping okay? And
you had to tell them that you're single. So yeah,
I was married at the time.
There's nobody there.
Yeah, no, I was married at the time, but
okay.
But but I think the best advice I got when I first started in my career was not to imprint my family on the pictures and the videos. Never say that kid looks like my kid, or that kid's the age of my kid, because that will break you. And so a lot of agents and officers, they look at this stuff as evidence, strictly evidence. And our focus is on getting those evil bad guys, the guys who are doing this. That's our focus. And our mental picture is to go after these guys and arrest them. And these horrible images and videos are just the evidence to put these guys away. So to sit there and look at a video, you really have to mentally say, I'm just looking at evidence. I'm looking at evidence of a crime. I'm actually witnessing a crime, and I'm jotting it down. No different than a firefighter who pulls a burnt body out of a building and says, oh, that's a little child like mine. at home. They don't do that. They never try to put themselves or try to imprint on, dead bodies in a car or they call them crispy critters. They'll say comments to kind of dehumanize the situation so they don't take that home with them.
Well, and I can't imagine, Corey, like as you said, these people who are involved in these undercover operations who have to pretend to like the people they're working with. Meanwhile, they have to, that they literally, their skin crawls just to be around them. And I just have such admiration for people who are willing to put themselves in those kind of situations. That is just, I can't even say what kind of admiration I have for that.
I don't know that I could do it. I don't know that I could dissociate what I'm seeing and say that's not like my kid, If I saw something like that, that would be very difficult. Videos online, even stuff like, on Twitter, sometimes it gets too much. I'm like, I can't watch that. I don't want to see somebody really get hurt. Like if it's a movie, I kind of understand, like, okay, yeah, gosh, bad guy just got blown up, whatever. It's a movie, it's all fake. But if that's real, like that's hard for me. I don't want to see that. I don't want to have that like imprinted on my brain.
Well, and that was one of the hard things about the movie, is because I think you're right, Everett, that there are times when you're watching a movie and there's horrific things that happen, but you're like, it's just a movie. Like that didn't really happen, But in this movie, you can't say that. You can't say that didn't really happen, because even though, like, I know that there are a little bit of dramatic license to tell the story, it is based on real people and real things that happen. And so, like, all of that comfort you can give yourself by saying, "Oh, but it's not real." You can't say that.
Yeah.
You can't say that these things are really happening.
Yeah, it's the people that work this stuff, and I know people that work this stuff. They're almost their whole careers, and they're true heroes because they don't let it bother them, and they're able to separate the difference between the material they're looking at. And some of my personal rules was that I wouldn't look at any material that wasn't related to a case I'm working or that I had to look at it. And that rule was across the board. So if somebody said, "Hey, dude, did you see that beheading video?" I'm like, "Nope.
Oh yeah,
I don't need to. I don't work terrorism, and I don't need to see a beheading video. I don't want to see it because there's no purpose for me to see it or to be traumatized by it." So, but if I had to see a video of a child being raped and looking at that video, I would tell myself, this is evidence of a crime. I need to see it. I need to write a report, but I'm going after the guy who distributed it or the guy who performed that act. Like that was the motivator, and never ever imprint like that kid looks like my kid. Like you could never do that. That would just break you.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing that, I don't know if you remember 15, 20 years ago, they had those beheading videos that were going around or something. And I had a friend that watched that, and he's like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." I'm like, "No, I don't even want to see it. I don't want to watch it. It's bad enough that it happened." And it was that kid that went over to wherever, Iraq or something. And it's like, I'm not interested in watching that sort of thing. At some point, I sort of feel like when I watch stuff like that, and this is the same thing with pornography, if I were to watch stuff like that, eventually you're kind of like, it's not that big of a deal. And then you have to get something that sort of stimulates you. And so you have to move on to the next thing. There's only so much you can move on to until it's really out of hand.
Yeah.
I would just rather not
and
even
also
take a step in that direction.
Yeah, I also think it's part of you can't let the darkness in. And so, Corey, you had a purpose for letting the darkness in. If you were watching those videos, you bring light to that darkness. But just to let the darkness in just for the darkness sake, there's no point in that. There's just no point.
I mean, if I looked at pornography, like if somebody said, hey, we got a bunch of adult videos here, who wants to watch it? I'd be like, no, there's no purpose for me in my job to do that. So all that's going to do is allow that in my brain, and I can't get rid of it. But people ask me all the time, like, do you remember the stuff that you saw? And I honestly don't. I know the concepts of what I saw. I know ages. I know sex acts. but I don't remember faces, and I don't remember them in detail. So, and I know that that's a blessing.
Yeah.
But because of the purpose my brain had of looking at it, it wasn't for self gratification. It wasn't for any other reason, but to go after bad guys and to save kids. Like, and when you have that purpose, your brain, there's no chemistry associated with what you're seeing.
Well, I just, there's one part in the movie, and I don't want it necessarily to be a spoiler, but I had a really profound thought, and this just, you just triggered it in some of what you were saying there, Corey, but there is a point where Tim Ballard gets into a boat alone with these rebels, and he's going off alone. And the thought that I had is, when we talk about going after the one and leaving the 99, that's what we're talking about. It's not just a little lost lamb who just wandered away and we have to go find them. But when, you know, when the Savior is rescuing one of the 100, that's what he's doing. He is getting into that boat. And so I think that, like, the example that we see of people who are going out of their way to save the one, like, that is what the Savior would do. That's what he did for us. And it was just a really powerful moment for me in that movie.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I don't know if you remember, but back in maybe 2 years ago, 2021, I think it was January 2021, there were 2 FBI agents that were killed in Miami serving a search warrant on a pedophile porn distributor. And he shot and killed 2 of the agents.
It's crazy.
So, and those people were like true heroes in terms of what they were working, the material they were working, and the dangers that they possess. And so, if you want to look that up, go look up their story. But those 2 are amazing people.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
profound.
Well, I think it's definitely a tender mercy from the Lord that you can watch, you know, you can kind of forget what you've had to watch as far as evidence goes. Yeah, again, that's just something I wouldn't want to have kicking around in my brain. You know, I try and be very cautious about things that I see and things that I run across, because I know I'm a guy, you know, it is very, you know, I don't know what it is, but the Lord instilled in us something where visuals matter. And so we are
natural man.
Based. That is the natural man.
It's the natural
I'm
man.
no different than anybody
order
else. The only difference is that I understand putting off the natural man sometimes means just not going down certain paths that the natural man would want to pursue.
You have to recognize the natural man when it shows up.
Absolutely. You know, that's a very,
I've got funny feelings and I want to go look at this video, you know.
Right. It's a very different view than what our society is preaching right now, because it's sort of a live and let live, be who you want to be, do what you want to do. It's all fair game. And when you open that door, when you allow anything in, the worst comes in with some of the best. So certainly, I think the Lord has held back technologies throughout history and learning, because he knew if I were to allow this floodgate now, you know, good things can happen. We've got the internet. We can get temple work done extremely fast. We have communication extremely fast. When church gets shut down, we can still have virtual meetings. There is a lot of good that can come out of the internet. But, oh, man.
Yeah, there's always good and bad with technology.
Absolutely.
You know, you can drive a car to church, or you can drive a car over and mow down a bunch of people on a sidewalk. So, I mean, you know, unfortunately, everything in life has 2 sides to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok video, and it was talking about something I thought was kind of profound, is that this crime is predominantly, you know, all of the players are predominantly male. And so this TikTok person was saying is that, you know, women have a tendency to stand up and cry about all of this sort of stuff a lot more easily. And the point she was making is that we need men to be men to solve this problem. You know, we need them to stop doing these terrible things, and we need men who will stand up to it. You know, because as women, we can certainly stand up to it, but we also need men to be men and to
I
be
think
able to
this movie hit $100 million so far and
Yeah.
they're not even in all the theaters. You know, they're like in half the theaters,
Yep.
and it's pretty amazing. And I think that this movie is shedding light on something, and you're seeing the thrashing and gnashing of teeth of the people who don't want this exposed. And I think that hopefully the momentum will carry, and that people will get on board to to combat this.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We've been talking about the blessings that the Lord has kind of given out, and I'm a firm believer that the Lord has given some people certain funds and means and abilities for a reason. For example, Operation Underground Railroad. Tim Ballard finds himself, I'm not working. I need money to get this thing going. And he turns to somebody who the Lord has blessed tremendously. And we've had an opportunity to reach out to Glenn and his wife and get a little feedback from them on their ability. Celeste, I know that you got some information from them. Do you want to share that with us on somebody who was more than blessed with the ability to help in this situation? And I truly believe that the blessings will be returned 1,000-fold. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I reached out to both Glenn and Tanya Beck, and you're absolutely correct. They have been blessed tremendously, and they bless others tremendously. So I can see why the Lord uses them as one of his tools. So I reached out, I just asked him a few questions, and they've given some answers. So the first thing I asked was, why did you feel inspired to help Tim? What was the interaction? How did that come about? And he wrote this back. So I'm just going to read it to him. I mean, read it so I don't misquote. So I'm just going to read what he said. So Glenn said, I was on the air talking about the two girls that had escaped from a basement in Cleveland, Ohio. They had been kept as slaves in that house for years, thought lost or dead. The story was so horrifying to me. It had been said that this happens all the time. I said on the air, we have got to do something. Is anyone doing anything? Tim called me during the commercial break. I only knew him as an author at the time, and said, someone is. I need to see you. I joined him a few weeks later in a conference room in Salt Lake City. He told me he had just left the Department of Homeland Security and had laid out a plan for Operation Underground Railroad. He told me he could get started if he had $1 million. My attorney, who was with me at the time, said, Glenn cannot be involved with this at all. He was worried about lawsuits, legalities, and revenge from drug lords. As he prattled on, I took a notepad and wrote, as long as it is clean and true, the Lord will protect us as you save his children. Don't listen to him. We are in. Then that was the beginning of OUR, or Operation Underground Railroad. Then we raised money to pull off the operation that is portrayed in that movie. My audience funded that operation. And I remember back when Glenn started promoting that and asking for support. And so anybody who did support, you are one of the people who have helped to not only save many, but to, produce this movie to be able to get the word out. Then I asked him, how does your family feel about that? And they're very humble people. They're not about to put a spotlight on themselves because they recognize that Jesus Christ is what is given, who's given them what they have, and they are just in turn giving. But he said to me, we feel fantastic about the success Tim has had with Operation Underground Railroad. It must be how people felt when Uncle Tom's Cabin was released and people finally started looking at slavery. So that was kind of, pretty poignant. I was like, that's exactly right. I think that's exactly what's happening right now with this movie. And there's a lot of people, including Satan, who are trying to stop it because it does share something that Satan thrives in. He loves this type of dark stuff. And then I finally just asked him, what can you say to LDS singles who are the main source of our followers on this podcast, that how can they help? And he said LDS singles can help by telling a friend and supporting Operation Underground Railroad, the Nazarene Fund, and any other legitimate organization that is fighting slavery. So that is what Glenn had to say and Tanya had to say. And I'm really grateful that they were able to get that for us and share that with us. And I'm just, I replied back to Tanya and I just said, you guys are amazing. You got an amazing husband and he's got an amazing wife. And together, through your ability to recognize the true value that every single soul has on this earth, you've been able to change so many lives. And so I thank them for us from the podcast. So
I just think that is fantastic for somebody who has such resources, has been blessed so richly. And here he has an attorney who's telling him, don't do this.
Yep.
The attorney's looking at it from a strictly worldly point of view. It's going to be a legal nightmare. Potentially, it could potentially cause harm to you and your family. It might not be a good investment. There's a lot of reasons not to do this. Glenn is listening to the Spirit tell him, this is why you have what you have. And if you don't do this, then you are missing this opportunity that these blessings were giving to you for. And I just think it's amazing that he, in that moment, listened to the Spirit and said, I don't care about the other stuff. That's not what's important. This is what's important. And kudos to him for completely ignoring his attorney and listening to the Spirit. He was listening to the right voice that day.
Yeah.
One was talking louder, but the other one was hitting harder.
And and it's just in their heart. They just want to help and support and love people. And I don't, there's no doubt in my mind that was not going to get past his table, like that he was going to dive in with that. So.
Right.
Well, and I think it's really, in the movie, you also see another very wealthy character who is able to help in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, sometimes we wonder, why are certain people blessed or why are we blessed in certain ways? I think it's such a great example to say, because the Lord needs you to help other people. The Lord helps people be successful in certain ways and certain opportunities because he wants them to help other people. We are his hands. So
exactly.
At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, and Glenn goes back and meets the Savior is not going to care how big his investment portfolio was or what sort of funds he left behind so that his family could live in luxury, but he will say, well done, great job. And what he was able to do in that situation will be richly rewarded. I am a firm believer in that. For anybody looking to be able to donate, you can go to operationrescue.org. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a button to donate. Here's the straight link to it if you're interested. I understand, especially with LDS singles, sometimes that is difficult. But more importantly, when we had talked with Brett Bunker, he gave us another little bit of information on things that we can do to try and help in this situation. One of the things that he had mentioned was on-watch training. Celeste, do you remember what on-watch training is about?
It's just awareness, being able to recognize the trafficking around you so that you can then act. Now, he did definitely tell us, we don't do anything about it. We don't intervene. We don't confront the situation, which is why he offered the hotline. If you see something, you take the training, you recognize this situation is not probably on the up and up, you call the number, then give what you can give, and then they can see what they can do. He does say it's very hard to prosecute. It's hard to get in there and get things done. But if we all have our eyes open, it's kind of like the Amber Alert, right? If we have our eyes open, we have a better chance of trying to save these kids before they fly off on a plane somewhere and maybe never seen again. So.
Absolutely. For me personally, and I believe there's a training video on there. I think this is all free, but this teaches you how to go through and recognize what is going on. And one of the things that Brent had talked about, and Corey, you can certainly speak to this as well, is just it's not everything that you see in the movie. There is a lot of variation of trafficking going on. I found it crazy, maybe is the best way to talk about it, that there are kids that go to school and during the day they're being trafficked and they come home at night. Their parents have no idea, but during the day, all of this is going on. And it's like, how would you recognize something like that? So that's why if anybody's watching today that wants to get involved or at least wants to understand how they can be a help in their community, please go check out this website, iamonwatch.org.
Can I just ask, I'm just going to say one more thing that I know was in the interview, but I think we actually cut it off and he had said it after we quit taping. But one thing that Brett did share with us was that when he's out helping what he calls angels, that he does see who they truly are. And they aren't their actions. They aren't their situation, that they truly are daughters of God. And he said he talked with one of them and he said, how do you keep going? You know, your life is pretty difficult. How do you keep going? And she pointed up and she said, you know, God. So even though they found themselves in the situation where they're finding themselves and whatever happened to get them there, sometimes their only link to hope is God. And so I think as we, tend to like maybe see people on the corners and maybe we have a quick judgment, maybe this will just give us a little bit of thought that maybe the only thing that's even keeping them here on this earth, despite their actions, is the fact that they have a faith in God and that they have hope that someday they'll be out of their situation.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for this conversation tonight. Thank you for watching the movie, Celeste, especially you. I know it was very difficult.
It was very difficult.
Joyce, thank you for your input. And Corey, thank you so much for sharing with us your experience in this situation. This is a very difficult topic, but one that's extremely important. And whether or not you're going to watch a movie and someone who doesn't believe in this is turning off the air conditioning, don't let that discourage you. Keep pressing forward and keep on keeping on with this because the good fight is not over yet. There's much to do. Having said that, thank you everybody for your input tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody in the audience. If you haven't had a chance to yet, check us out on YouTube. Go give us a like and subscribe on there and hit the notification bell for future videos. We really appreciate all of our subscribers and everybody on Facebook. We love you all. Until next time.